It's entire races, like, clashing. It's the politics.
There's a lot of memories of Twilight Imperium because it was such a predominant part of my life.
Even though it's not our best-selling product by a long shot, I think it's the iconic Fantasy Flight product.
First time we played was on my birthday. We dedicated the day.
It's just got such majesty and such mystique.
Punching out all the pieces and putting it on the table, and then it's like, all right, now we're gonna play this beast.
I still never played it, and it's just kind of like an ongoing joke where I continue to talk about, I really want to play this game. We should get together and play.
We also played Twilight Imperium at my wedding. Sorry, I lied. We also played Twilight Imperium at my bachelor party. That would have been, oh man, where is Corey? Isn't he supposed to be over? No, he's out back.
It's really a revival of what once was an apocalyptic place. It's a new era. It's a new star is rising. There's no good guys.
To me, the legend of it in my mind has grown so much that I almost feel like I've played it, even though I haven't.
We were trying to target basically the summer, the 20th anniversary for the game. We'd be off for a little bit, but we were still hitting the 20th anniversary.
We have a documentary film team with us today.
Yes.
And this is very odd.
The scope of the game changed a lot throughout the process.
To me, this needs to be something above and beyond, hopefully, what any game company has ever created before, ever.
What is the maximum retail price point?
So
we were talking
to me, there's no maximum. It's all about. To me, it's all about how much value can we add.
Sure.
Suddenly we can't afford this. Suddenly we can afford this.
Is it risky? Could this be a product that loses some money? I mean, yes, I don't think so. I think the market will reward our work for what we're doing, but...
Honestly, it was a relief because I think that if we had drawn a line in the sand and said, we're going to do this game or we're not going to do it at all, it probably wouldn't have gotten made.
Every edition of Twilight Imperium for us has been something unique and novel. Maybe it's hard to see that going back, but when we first put out Twilight, it was basically a Hail Mary pass from a comic book or a children's book company.
I was at a comic book show and I was wandering through the hall, and at the end of the dealer room was this guy looking kind of sad behind this stack of board games. All alone. It's a comic book show, right?
We've been publishing comic books and the business was not going well. We were doing European comic books in the US and they weren't selling.
I would say definitely Twilight Imperium means a lot to Christian. It is the game that saved his company. Fantasy Flight Games wouldn't be here without Twilight Imperium.
The comic book crowd is a little bit different. Now I think the overlap is a lot greater, but if you're going there and you're going to talk to the hot artists or get Todd McFarlane to sign your Spider-Man comic or whatever, you don't care about this quite complex strategy game in space with a lion man on the front, right?
I've had a small company when I grew up in Denmark that imported games, so maybe I could make a game. I played thousands of them. I have an endless, bottomless pit of game ideas that I can draw from, which has been well drawn from over the years, by the way. And first one that came to mind was I really wanted to have this big, epic game of diplomacy and warfare and progression, and I had this really cool idea, which was that I should do it with big hexagons that you could form into other hexagons, and so the game board would be all varied. Very novel. The only other game that I'd seen done this was a game called Magic Realm. We went to Gen Con after I'd made the prototype, and what was interesting is that Gen Con 97, I was very bummed out. In a way, because there was another game. It was a silly game about trading sheep and wood. You built little villages and so on, and we also used my hexagons in exactly the same shape, because the game that I had seen was the very first English edition of the Settlers of Catan board game, which would turn out to be a boon for us all, that game grew the industry so much. But yet, the very first time I saw it, I was a little bit irritated with it, because it used my hexagon map board idea, which clearly was not my idea, but at the time I was very fond of it.
Christian very much, in the early days, I don't know how much he's talked about this, but he did it all himself. I mean, literally everything.
And I was by myself at the time. I didn't have anybody at the company. I was all alone. I was Fantasy Flight Games.
Look at the back. Oh, beautiful.
Oh. And he packed the boxes too, everything. It's 100% him.
I had gotten all the orders. I'd called up all the distributors and retailers that wanted to buy the game. 1,500 copies were sold, which was unbelievable because we had never made us sell more than 600 copies of a comic book.
This one is MSRP $44.95.
The logo's him. And so if you look, Fantasy Flight's logo is the exact same font as Twilight Imperium. I mean, that's just how much Twilight Imperium is part of Fantasy Flight. We're using the same font. Maybe most people don't care. I don't know.
And it really was a different time because board games really had sort of died out in the hobby. There was virtually no board games left. Magic the Gathering had taken over the hobby. A few key role-playing games were dominating, like Vampire, some Shadowrun. I mean, but board games was a shadowy corner of the industry. Everything felt new, and people were so excited. We went to a show here in the United States called Origins. And it was the first show that we were showing Twilight Imperium off at in its final copy. So we brought 60 or something copies of Twilight Imperium, and we sold them like in a day and a half. Oh, amazing. I think now people are probably using that area for demonstrations all the time, but there's an empty, well-lit corridor, and nobody was using it. And so we went around and snuck some couple of tables out of a room and put them out there and put the tables out there because it was where all the traffic was. You know, it wasn't in the convention center. It was in the mezzanine corridor. So very guerrilla marketing of us. We were demoing Twilight Imperium hour after hour after hour after hour after hour. Sometimes referred to that corridor of the glass corridor at Origins as kind of the birthing canal of FFG, because I really felt that place was where I felt to get the energy to keep going, sort of feel that there were really people out there who really loved the stuff.
Have you looked at a version of first edition where there's little tiny ship drawings on all the tokens? That's all him.
I couldn't afford to have the factory separate the different cardboard pieces because they had to do with a manual jackhammer or something. I can't afford it. I will have to do it because I'm cheap.
Oh, man.
They were shipped like this?
He's all alone putting these games together.
We had to tear them off.
We had to break apart the cardboard sheets to put them in.
Tearing so many off caused like paper dust.
He was doing it all alone in a warehouse and eventually inhaled enough cardboard that he had to go to like the hospital or something.
I ended up getting pneumonia from infected paper dust.
And I was like, man, he's done it all. Like it's pretty amazing.
Pairing of planets hasn't changed either, because I know Quan goes with the Alpha Wormhole. Interesting. How much has stayed the same and how much has changed?
When I come by here, every time it seems to be bigger, and now this is like, it's a kingdom. It's a whole, it's a whole thing now.
The second edition was the first game we had plastic in.
TI3 hurt to punch out. These are like harder plastic. This will hurt even worse.
We worked with these local guys. His dad had a tooling factory and made up these small spaceships out of plastic. We actually had too many of them, so for years and years and years we had these several pallets full of plastic spaceships. And I think we were trying to sell them off for other people. It's like, need some spaceships? We got some spaceships for you.
Not punched cards. What is happening right now?
They had annotated headings.
No.
Yeah.
They didn't.
This is a new thing for our rulebooks, is we do annotations throughout all of our rules and the rules reference.
We were so forward thinking.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
I remember really early on when I was first learning about Twilight Imperium as I came to the company. At the time, it was just Christian and Todd.
And when I'd come by, it was those three guys like standing around a desk at a little strip mall thing right down the road here. They had like one little unit. I don't even know if they had a warehouse in the back. It was tiny. When they decided to do a second edition, they commissioned me to do full color artwork for it.
The reason we're going back for Scott again and again is because the visuals in my head and the narratives and stories in my head, he's able to take those and go somewhere with them.
It's rough. Like looking at it now, it's like the mistakes and there's just giant puffy red spot there for some reason. I mean, I don't know. They paid me for it, so.
Christians, when it comes to things like Tyranoth, you can be like really, really picky with like the look and like hitting a proper style, and it can be a slog sometimes.
I do get to be a backseat designer, probably much to the grief of some of my staff.
But when it comes to Twilight Imperium, he's been really satisfied with the work that Scott does.
So back in 2000, I was like, yeah, this fish guy has got some tubes.
I think their imaginations just gel.
I might not exactly know the names of all these races. I might not be an expert on the actual game itself. This guy here, he's been known as Fishhead for 12 years? He's Fishhead. Turtle Guy? Yeah, that's Turtle Guy. I've had to look this up, so I know he's called the Hakan. I know they're called Letnevs just because I've... Insect? Yeah, he's the insect guy. We gotta get serious about Bug Guy. He's gotta look a little more fierce and bug-like.
The thing I think I've liked a lot about Scott's is the evolution of the Hylar. He started off, he's like a little kind of blue, goofy-looking dude over there, like the alien from American Dad.
The original version of him, he was very dough-heady.
They're like the California raisins, kind of this shriveled head. They're not very cool looking.
I've been calling him Fish Guy. I'm like, well, we should probably put him in some water. So then in the next edition, I throw him in a little tank. If you were a little fish guy in space, you'd want to be encapsulated in like some kind of giant armory thing to survive. You probably would never climb out of there. It would fly you around. It would shoot things for you, whatever it was. Like you wouldn't get out of that little like tube thing. Doing collages is like, it's all the fun parts of drawing the characters without too much background. And as an artist, like a background's fine, But if I can just draw like cool fish head guys and like some space line with like some jewelry on from like the shoulders up, that works for me.
Twilight Imperium could well be the single biggest game on the market today, and when I say that, I'm not talking about the ridiculous box or the absurd amount of table space it takes up. I'm talking about the scale of this game and the stories that it tells.
It's a space opera, and each one of you will play an alien race vying for control of the galaxy.
These were all sculpted by hand with kind of like a waxy material and then just little bits of metal just kind of thrown together to kind of create this effect, which I think these hold up pretty well, honestly.
Third edition was a kind of an awakening in design for me. Designed that not far after, sort of alongside the Game of Thrones board game. And it really was an attempt to try to keep the feeling that you're in a story and hook it up with some of the game elegance that the German games had showed us could be done.
Christian was inspired by Euro games like Puerto Rico.
There are ways to simulate something complex in a simple way.
Twilight Imperium 3rd edition, it's a beast, everybody knows it is. But if you actually dig down into the components, into the mechanics, it's not as intimidating as it seems.
Diplomacy really is what it comes down to.
Best friends forever. How did you guys miss that part?
You're trying to make this grand strategy work out, and then you're right on the crux of being able to push it over the edge and to make it work, and somebody interrupts you with something that is just terrible, and you will give them anything to back away and let me do this.
Mutual destruction. Come on.
Yes! We felt like that's where the world would be going. It's more narrative, less abstract, a little less dry, and we wanted to try to have a school of game design that would kind of merge those concepts.
Maybe you have an objective you're trying to accomplish, or maybe it's just you're still mad at him from the last game you played. You just can't wait to take out his homeworld. We've been at odds. It's okay. I forgive you.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, he knows what I'm talking about.
Jason does things that don't really follow human logic. Why do you want me to vote?
So that this doesn't happen.
He wants to steal your tech.
I think you're just not aware of the human logic that I'm using. That might be the key.
Jason also is a dirty betrayer.
Yeah, I can be
of the worst degree.
Yeah, that's true.
Why would you break that of all things? That doesn't even make any sense.
Another major part was we really made this a big game. This was a big box. Many of our wholesalers were really upset with us because they called us back saying, we don't actually not have cartons to ship these boxes in. And we are now having to buy custom cartons just for your bloody space game that your 3rd edition of the space game that you made.
All the pieces and like hearing how much it cost, and it just seemed ridiculous.
When I applied to work at Fantasy Flight Games, in addition to my application, my cover sheet and all that stuff, I actually sent in a mini expansion for Twilight Imperium that I had designed. I could have totally shot myself in the foot. Chris would have read it and said, oh, this is crap. Don't hire this guy. But some of those things actually ended up in the first expansion that I got to work on years later.
You know, anybody who's familiar with Twilight Imperium's played the game, they notice there's a little bit of a story on the back of each of their sheets, and that's basically where the lore is. And that's the only spot it exists in any kind of written form. There is the Twilight Imperium RPG, but that really is not an accurate document.
I've started to build the IP wiki by just starting with like the race sheets and the fiction and stuff I mentioned to you before. Should I completely ignore the RPG?
Yes.
This is the role-playing game source book.
I was really glad to hear that we can ignore this entirely.
The RPG, there was nothing in the RPG that was ever canon.
I think that's the one with the robot gorillas in it. Did you see any in there?
It was made completely
Robot gorillas.
It was made.
Were there robot gorillas?
Yeah. So the reason that there was a robot gorillas put into the Twilight Imperium RPG back 20 years ago was because somebody had a free piece of art of a robot gorilla, and we were so poor that we couldn't afford any artwork. And so if we had a free piece of artwork of a robot gorilla, we could use, well, why not throw it into the universe?
This gorilla.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, oh, I guess Chris hates this gorilla.
They were like, hey, we want to do a Twilight Imperium role-playing game. Chris is like, okay, sure, but I don't have time to be involved. Let's see what you come up with. This came out. I said, why'd we do that?
He's going to be on the 4th edition cover. There it is. Somewhere. Stay tuned, right? Well, I'm going to try to work him in. We'll see. It's a big cover.
But there's a copy of the RPG in the office, I guess, right?
Maybe?
I have
got one on your shelf.
Is it possible that I could, even though it's not canon?
You may never see this.
Oh, please. I'm going to, if you don't,
There's
I'll
no
just
art.
All
email
copies
it.
have been burned. That's the reason why all the copies were burned and destroyed, is because it's the opposite. It's misinformation.
These early guys, they're just people with giant oversized heads. I like to flip through them every now and then for a little bit of inspiration, because right now there's this trend, real squarish technology and squarish robots, and I love it. I can't get enough of that, but I don't think that's Twilight Imperium. It still feels like it needs to look like something from like the late 90s. So I flip through these things and I see this guy and I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, but this guy's gonna be on the next picture. And so, like this guy here, the same headset, he's even got like a silly radar dish on his back. Although that might have just been part of the background, I might have misread that one.
The pipe, he's got a pipe.
Oh, he does.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man, that's great.
This is an early turtle guy. He's got a cloak, he's got a pipe. Christian is a big fan of Lord of the Rings. He's a hobbit.
They had started out kind of little hobbity-esque characters, smoking little pipes.
I almost immediately was like, we're losing the pipe.
This is not good.
Do you have any advice to anyone of how they'd make a sexy space turtle? If you don't, that's fine, and we can...
It's probably all shell. The turtle guy's not set on the new one, but now all of a sudden I'm thinking, could he be sexier? Could he? I've never tried to make a sexy turtle. Let's do it. That's also part of the fun for me, is coming up with these things and having to have that conversation in my head about like what makes a sexy turtle.
So for any board game that we work on in FFG, it always starts with the vision meeting.
We need to do something that truly is something that will blow our minds, and hopefully by sheer collateral damage, everybody else's mind will also be blown.
We don't believe price point matters.
Well, let's say we want to have a game that's like $249.99, which is a big, huge monster of a game. That's probably
sounding about right.
Roughly where we should be, like $250.
Yes. That's the biggest question for me, and that came out of that meeting, what the retailer interest will be in a game that's a $250 price point.
This game is going to be huge, and we're going to do all this stuff, and the retailer's going to go, no, we don't want it because it's strange and big and too bizarre for us.
There's a lot of political navigating that will need to be done.
How would FFG, and would we ever utilize a crowdsourcing platform like Kickstarter?
Yeah, the Kickstarter is completely uncharted territory for us.
I mean, we've seen some other people with their giant games out there.
Like, it's entirely democratized the process of making a game. If you want to make a game, you have a really, really great opportunity to do that through Kickstarter. But there's also companies that have been so successful with Kickstarter that it's part of their business model.
One thing we could never do with Twilight Imperium, ever, never, never, is to actually make really, really detailed, beautiful plastic miniatures that were really idiosyncratic for every race. Like, we would have like the Soul Soldiers, the Soul Spaceships, the Soul Battle Stations. With a crowdfunding experience, we could put those special pieces directly into the game.
We came out of our vision meeting with an idea that we want to do this giant Kickstarter. Who knows how much we're going to charge for it? It's going to have just the basic 6 races in there, but we're going to make them awesome. They're going to have unique plastic for each of the races.
This is a tool that would probably cost us about $12,000 a piece.
You have to do that for each race.
Right, so that would be $120,000 in tooling. So one of the things about
there's no assembly too. I mean,
that's a sports car, right?
We wouldn't want to give them on sprues this time either, right?
No, we don't want them on sprues, which also adds more expense. Because we used to do this in these kind of nifty sprues, which was considered to be totally cool at one point. Mm-hmm. And now, if you put these things in a sprue and you're not a miniatures company, then everybody, their mind goes.
The only pressure I feel is in the practicality of getting it done. You don't want to get bogged down in the details too much, but I just keep thinking of like the sheer number of sculpts we'll have to do. 11 sculpts, unless you engineer some other.
So it'll be 11 sculpts per race. So that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, we want to think about having like little fighters, and then you have that rotating base that actually indicate how many fighters they're represented.
Speaking of expensive,
Armada, we've designed this little special kind of hex that has a rotating dial on it. Basically says this is the strength of this fighter unit. Mm-hmm. And so instead of like piling in like 12 fighters into one spot, it makes more sense to have them in like a little trilogy of fighters.
Well, I wanted to ask a question. So, like imagine we do this without Kickstarter.
Would this be possible for us to do on our own on the basis of what it would cost?
If it is,
if the answer is yes, maybe we don't do a Kickstarter. Maybe we just do it on our own.
We've never really been in a position where we've had to ask anyone for money for Kickstarter.
Something we were resisting for years and years and years, because we could easily have gone out and joined the other people out there in the world that pretty much puts everything on there like a pre-order.
I'm buying the core game, but I'm also buying all these extra things. It feels almost more acceptable to spend that gigantic amount of money on that thing, because it's like, I'm actually getting 10 products. That averages out to like $40 a piece. That's fine. That's exactly what I do normally.
That sounds expensive?
We've thrown around the idea of doing it for other projects, but nothing really felt like it made sense. I guess my question is the Kickstarter really going to inform whether or not we do this game?
Yeah.
We can be clear with the audience as to why this needs to be a Kickstarter.
We're going to put out a game that is this ambitious, and the only way to do it really is that way.
Okay.
So if that doesn't work, then we sort of say, okay, well maybe people just want Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition the way it is.
And then we scale it back.
Or we don't do it.
Yeah, the only trick there is
when it came time to do 2nd edition, he's like, we're going to take 2 regular Arkham Horror boxes, we're going to tape them together, that's going to be the size.
Christian was trying to put it in the biggest box possible.
When we started talking about 4th and commissioning art from Scott, he said, you know what I want you to do? Go out, get 4 cake boxes, tape them together. And I did that. It was enormous, right? It was basically like a small vehicle. We couldn't even carry it through doors realistically. You're like, this is ridiculous. Then in talking to the factory, he found out the machine doesn't even make a box that big.
And we couldn't actually physically manufacture that box.
Oh, that's right. That's why we have some physical manufacturing.
But I don't think you want it, because it would start to bend and get all wobbly. And
you can reinforce it.
But like we could, sure you could.
Like Fury of Dracula, we didn't say like, you know what? Let's sculpt little vampires for all over the country or whatever. Like make it look better, make it work a little better, and away you go. But Twilight Imperium, it's always like, let's put it in a giant box. Let's make the biggest box ever made.
There's one requirement.
Yeah, I mean, does that really scream at you impressiveness?
Yeah.
Does it? It looks like a shirt box to me. It doesn't feel impressive. To me, that just feels thin. I don't like that. I guess the idea that I have is more like a hat box, so that's not a whole lot more exciting.
This is what we can manufacture from a machine.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, I thought we got somewhere where it was like, oh, let's do this box and then double the width. We're like, oh, okay, that sounds all right. And I felt like we could all agree on that. But in the end, we won't know until I don't know when we'll know.
So if this was
sure.
I have cameras today, so it's not normal.
It's kind of normal. It's kind of normal.
That's kind of normal.
We were just brainstorming ways to make the game, shiny and bling.
The big magnetic box, was Jason talking about that?
I don't like magnetic boxes because they cost a lot of money and they don't really do all that much.
We never followed it too far, but the idea was that the whole box was like a magnetic thing that would open and fold out.
Who came up with the idea of magnetic boxes?
I think Christian actually mentioned, he's like, what if Mechatol Rex was a centerpiece? Like it actually had a figure, something in the middle that kind of did something. So there was a moment that I was researching, a little globe that you put in the middle that shines a star field onto your walls.
Like you're spending more money for the box than you are for what's in it?
I'm looking at 2 budgets here that we put together, and they're dated as June 2016. This is probably the last time that the $250 budget was addressed.
When Jason was polling people and saying, what would you want out of a big game like this? The number one answer, not even knowing it was Twilight Imperium, was a storage solution.
I mean, even just a vacuum tray. I'm not sure how it would work in this, but the concept of vacuum trays they are appreciated, even though they're expensive.
I don't appreciate them at all because they don't work. So you spend all your time putting this stuff in vacuum trays. As soon as you put them on your shelf, everything falls out in your vacuum trays.
We had 8 players in the base game, which we cut down to 6.
I mean, 8 players is hardly ever done.
Doing a flight stand cost about as much as if not more, than an actual piece of miniature.
So if you want 41 of them, that's still 41 cents, not 14 cents.
Yeah, which is why that was...
So this is just wrong. I cannot believe this is correct.
You're basically either having your amount of miniatures in the game, or you're doubling your miniatures cost.
Interesting, but it's going to take up a lot of room for every ship, a lot of room. Has anybody experimented with that?
I don't know if they've tried with those circular ones yet.
No.
Sometimes we design a game that is dependent on content, and those games have planned expansions from the beginning.
So if our expansions aren't feasible, we might need to start offloading some of that back to the core set, which shifts the core set budget.
The way we had to produce the game required us to make everything at once so that we could allow those stretch goals to be given at the same time the core game came out.
We were hoping that we could do one race for $40.
Yeah. So what I got... I'm not sure about that.
One thing we have to all realize, and we're continually reminded of here, is how much things have gone up in price.
We don't have given you any extra planets. We don't give you any extra cards. There's no...
Particularly between 2005 and 2008 or 2009, there was just a tremendous increase in price in printing games in Asia, especially.
It's just that plastic is so damn expensive. Mm-hmm. Wow.
There must have been 10 different versions of that budget at one point.
One kind of takes all the extra stuff off. It just gives you just the stuff for...
What are you charging for sculpting on there?
$500 a piece for 7 unique sculpts. You know, and we had other versions that were a little more expensive that popped out even more.
How expensive is this box?
This one is even worse.
I think from the beginning, everyone wasn't quite sure if we were able to do it. Like, it was like a scheduling nightmare to try to get the sculptor enough time to do that many sculpts, because that's a lot.
How do we tell the different ships apart?
If you had to remember the sculpts for every single alien race in TI and know, like, oh, is that your destroyer, or...
Is that a dreadnought? His dreadnought's a giant waffle. Mine's a triangle.
I mean, it's tough enough to remember the difference between destroyers and cruisers anyway. Multiply that by 17, and it's just crazy.
What color do you even do them? There's 17 races in the game. I'm glad I got the plaid plastic for the L1Z1X, and we've got fuchsia over here for the Letnev. It would just look awful. 4 months to produce all the plastic if we just have a machine that's just producing plastic.
I don't think we could get out that by Gen Con then.
What were you guys thinking? I mean, of course we had to have that stuff out.
This is also the factory that produces plastic for other games.
I mean, there's no expansions on the release schedule right now, so there have been no discussions about when.
Well, I mean, we knew we were gonna. Well, I mean, we knew we were gonna add this extra stuff, and so I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, it was never communicated.
It was a little disappointing when we actually looked at, well, for $250 retail even, what can we actually put in there? It's like, well, I thought we could put a lot more in there for that price.
The price has inflated so much for all of those components that TI3, as it was in the core now, would have been unproducible at that price by a not insignificant margin.
I don't understand, if the math is so hard in the expansion, why the core set is not a problem.
That was that conversation that we had about the plastic where it kind of came to head.
I don't think that the budget works for the main game either.
That's not feasible.
What the project was and what the plastic was just kind of like narrow down until it was very sensible.
If we promote something as a really amazing artifact of a product, shouldn't it be a lot more impressive than 3rd edition? I would think yes, but if you can't achieve that for anything below $400, a copy, then maybe we have to change what our scope is.
Okay. Then we may want to reconsider the whole thing.
Won't have flagships, or if we do, they won't have unique plastic. They'll replace a dreadnought, which definitely did not end up happening. Mm-hmm. Keep tech tree the same. Nope, that didn't happen either.
We kind of ran into a little bit of a roadblock. Like, well, what do we do?
It was just never possible to reach that point where we could release everything at once.
We had a plan, and now it's not producible, and it's not going to be a good experience.
Were we not able to meet the stretch goals, say there were X amount of races that we couldn't include right off the bat, making those races in the future would have been practically unproducible?
Dane and Jason lost a lot of sleep, and it's because of their hard work that this actually is going to come out now.
We were told to make it work between 150 and 250, and so we did.
We had this mock box that we put together and put all this stuff in there, and I would walk around the office and I'd hand it to people, and I would ask them, how much do you think this, just on weight alone, how much do you think this should cost? And they would pick it up and it would immediately kind of lurch over with the weight of it all.
But as soon as you look at expansions and you start to say, what does an expansion look like? And it's $50, $60.
Ultimately, what we decided is that we're going to just do a pre-order program.
There are some strings attached with Kickstarter that we just wanted to keep clean from.
It's okay if you have a shiny piece of plastic that nobody else has, because it's not affecting the gameplay. And it's okay if you have a special edition rulebook. To give somebody entirely new content, like a deck of cards or a race that somebody else couldn't have access to, we wanted to avoid that disparity.
We also felt that maybe a large publisher like us should probably stay off of Kickstarter to let that be a breeding ground for more of the independent small developers.
And so what do? We talked for a while, and we came up with the idea of, well, what if instead of just having the 6 races with the unique sculpts for them, we include every race, all those 17 races, and we drop them in one box together.
Yeah, you went from 6 to 17 races designed in a week. He was so excited. He was just like, I gotta bring up.
It was a good time.
As we were playtesting, the fans were complaining, why would I buy TI4 if it's got less of the stuff from TI3? What if my beloved race is removed from the game?
One of the things we've been lucky with is that TI3 has such a huge following, is that there are a ton of people who are extremely dedicated to testing it.
They will put in an enormous amount of effort to print out all the components, mock it up, cut out little tokens and whatnot, and they don't have all the baggage that we've had from working on it for the last 4 or 5 months. Part of their goal is to try to exploit the system and try to find the broken combos.
6 to 8 hour playtests are not insignificant amount to ask of your playtest group. It's an investment.
We have people that play all the time over at our game center over here. The game center is located at 1975 West County Road B2. It's a wonderful experience. You should all go there a lot.
But what if I want to drink and eat? I can't game and drink and eat at the
But
same
you
time.
can.
Oh, you snap.
Yeah, we have a regular group that's here at least once a month, if not nearly weekly. And they come in, they break out TI. Actually, one of my employees, her name Alex, her husband is one of the members of the group. They actually met here playing TI.
I conned him into letting me move into the wormhole space. I told him I was going to give it back, and I did not.
So they met over a game of TI.
I just kind of think about it, and I was like, getting married at the place you met is really kind of sweet.
Got married in the game center and now continue to play TI as a group.
You spend enough time here, you really get to know the other people that kind of live here.
I've always liked the Israel tribes and the L1Z.
I was gifted a custom race 1 year for Hanukkah, and it was the Time Lords of Gallifrey, and that is my favorite.
There are definitely races that I think when they're playing because they affect the way that game is played.
The necrovirus, they can tend to snowball a little bit because of their ability to copy tech from other people, but at the same time they tend to be at odds with their neighbors immediately. Nobody wants to be their friend.
People have to create their own stories and narratives in there. You try to put flesh and bone on the character descriptions and all that stuff, but you also have to get a pretty large degree of freedom. Otherwise you feel like, well, why am I taking over Mechatol Rex? According to the fluff and the lore, that was impossible. What you wanted to be able to do is set games in there where people can feel like they can come in and they can sort of say, okay, we are now in year X, and for the next 6 hours, the X plus years are mine, and I'm going to dictate the way that the world is going to work. And there isn't a history book out there that says, no, we're doing it all wrong, because it actually ended like this. And sometimes to tell a certain type of story, you just have to take your time to do it, and if people feel more vested, 5 hours or 4 hours or 6 hours, however long it takes.
If we made this Twilight Imperium suddenly play in 30 minutes, that would be a disaster.
I know there's mixed feelings on, we streamlined the tech system a little bit.
I would rather a game be a good, solid, modern game than to not change stuff out of fear.
What we're trying to do is not make a game that has a zillion options.
In Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition, there were a whole litany of optional rules. Each of the expansions offer 10 new options.
And that's something we've gone away from in the last number of years because it creates this burden on starting the game.
Optional rules can do as much harm as good. A lot of people just want to know what's the most fun way to play the game. What's the way that the designer intended.
The one thing I feel is successful is that about an hour in or hour and a half in, if people start acting out like their race and start talking in fungus people voices, I hate this loss. Then I feel like, all right, we're into it now.
So one of the challenges really is that a lot of this exists only in Christian's head.
Take the information I get from him, process it, look at the stuff we get, and feel like if that's in line, I'll show him the things that I like, and then he'll let me do it or not.
What's it like working with other people who don't? Because I guess you can live in that galaxy whenever you want to.
Yeah.
They can't.
It's fine for me. It's terrible for them. Poor guys, right?
Having Christian be the owner and creator of the IP presents its own challenges, and it makes some things easier. He's right here. We can just ask him a question.
Chris is pretty heavily involved in Tiernoth, but it's nothing like Twilight Imperium. He's written all of the fiction for Twilight Imperium.
Yeah, I mean, that is part of the problem with working on some of Chris's galaxies, because he has strong opinions about them, and yet I'm not in it. I don't live in Chris's head, and Chris doesn't have a lot of time to meet with me or to write it all down. And so, oops, what do we do?
Well, let's make something up, and we'll put something in there that maybe doesn't fit into the universe, but we have no idea if it fits in because we haven't asked the right questions.
You can't live in one person's head, its whole life. It has to hopefully evolve certain laws of physics and laws of character and laws of narrative and history. And as long as those laws are sort of generally adhered to, then it can be surrendered and it can be collaborated on.
In his mind, he's got a very clear picture of, the Excha, they are really like this. I only had this much space to talk about them in Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition, but I could have talked for days and days about them.
Trying to align my creative impulses with Chris's. It's very challenging to do, and it's very frustrating when it doesn't work out.
I'm more worried. I
just want to make sure Chris is happy with the aesthetic direction. Because it's like, I want more detail here or here. Like, I can't. If he hates them, then we have a month to get them where we need them to be before they have to go to China. This was the Dreadnought. And then the idea was, at one point you'd be able to upgrade your Dreadnought to a flagship, and then it had like this little hat that you put on it. But then we learned that no, you just have one flagship. So we got rid of the whole hat idea because it wasn't quite working. These are all just 3D printed. I think that's one of the great things about our sculpting department. Print stuff out, review it. It's much better than what we used to do, which was get photographs from a factory in China and then have to try to judge like what the depth of field like on the lens was to see, or like where the focal point was on the figure, because sometimes like details would look really, really huge if they're like coming towards the camera. You're like, is that hand too big?
I mean, most people know delta as the triangle.
Yeah.
Right. But that's the capital delta.
Oh.
And this are the lowercase alpha and beta. That was the challenge, trying to use Greek letters. But
you don't need to use Greek letters if you don't want to. You felt like you had to because we did it before.
In gameplay, people just tend to call them the A hole and the B hole and the D hole. And so it sounds much better to call them the alpha wormhole and the beta wormhole and the delta wormhole.
Yeah, okay, there's value there. It took a long time for me to come to terms with the size. Imagine like trying to fit this plastic in those hexes. Absolutely impossible, it's huge. And I, like for some reason I had in my head like, oh, we're gonna do bigger hexes. These will be on little flight stands, like they'll be at different levels, it'll be totally fine. But then I was looking at these in my office with the sculpting manager, and I brought Corey in, and I was like, so what do you think of these? Corey's like, oh my God, that's huge. What are you guys doing? And I'm like, you're right. What am I doing? The War Sun was one of the last pieces that we did. I believe at this point, I reviewed the sculpts with Chris, and then he wanted more towers, so we got more towers and bits. And then I reviewed it, I'm like, even more towers and bits, and then we did this one.
It's always been essentially a Death Star that nobody called the Death Star.
But I really liked the idea of, making the War Sun not just a Death Star ripoff and do more with almost like a jellyfish kind of bottom.
I don't know how much of this is going to actually translate then into like how they describe it in the game, but that it's some sort of like black hole creator that eats planets essentially instead of just because we've got a Death Star. We don't need another giant thing that moves up and then shoots and...
Overall, I would say that I was happy with the final image for the cover. I was a little disappointed overall in how much it looks like the 3rd edition cover.
The Lion, he's always had a red headdress.
I really want it to be gold.
I'm going to try to swap his gold and red so he should have like some kind of gold headdress with some kind of, I don't know, red ornamentation.
So I made this gold hood. I took a whole bunch of, photo reference of it. I thought it looked pretty fantastic. And then they were like, no gold hood. We need to do a red hood because people are going to be really confused if they see a space game with a lion in and he doesn't have a red hood.
I get a lot of leeway. He likes a lot,
The first 3 times I heard him say it needs to be red, I thought, maybe if I just don't do it and just maybe they'll forget. They did not forget.
Bothers me about the design is it does feel a little bit too militaristic. And I know that's my fault because I asked for him to bring that detail in here. I don't know. We could never quite get the design exactly where I wanted it.
I mean, it's carrying fighters to the battlefield.
It's true. That's true. Honestly, this is like, it was a pretty tricky project to work on because of how invested Chris is in it, so anytime you are this like surrogate creative director for somebody else, it's really, really challenging. 2nd week in November.
Sure.
Show these to Chris.
Sure.
I struggled a lot in the early going, just trying to land on what I wanted because I couldn't really divorce the sense that no matter what I wanted, it wouldn't necessarily be what Chris had in his head. So it put me in a position where I felt like I was just really making really wishy-washy calls, and that's not usually what I do. So I felt uncomfortable for a lot of the process. But then at a certain point, I just brought the stuff to Chris, got some feedback. He said, "Yeah, I don't really like this one," and I was like, "Oh, thank God," because I don't like it either.
Do you want to be the boss? I don't want to be the boss for the sake of being the boss, no.
I had a running tally of like all of my all of my cover commissions, and so I could like remind myself that my percentage of approvals was actually pretty good. Because for like every like 10 good things or like one bad thing just kind of like wipes them all out.
Originally, the cover was supposed to include, I believe, 10 different races, and then that kind of got scaled back a little bit. I was also working on a L1Z1X concept guy in 3D that I had pretty well rendered out. Another one of my goals was to try and make the space colorful.
Graphically, one thing that I think makes TI different than Star Wars is space is blue.
It's like friendly blue, too. It's very
different.
soft.
Super black space with some light stars. Drives me nuts.
We don't have any black space in our planets. This is one of Christian's things. He loves the blue space, and I agree.
The space was great. It had pink on one side, lime green on the other, and I think some cyan in it. I was feeling pretty good about it. And then slowly, as we went back and forth talking about changes, the space started to get darker and darker. And a couple times I just was like, ignored them just to see if they just forget about it maybe. It did not happen. I was like, well, all right, I'll show them. I'll make it so ridiculously black and boring looking that they'll be begging me to add more color to it. That night I busted open the Photoshop file, colored the whole thing black. The next time I talked to him, he was like, the space looks great. Thank you for finally getting it. And and I was like, okay.
You don't set off building something to be a boss. You set up building something to build something. What ends up happening is that as you grow, and it's great, you gain a lot more resources by which you can build things even better and bigger and more interesting and hopefully touch more people positively than you could before.
Now that I'm in the position I am now, I'm sure that there's, like everyone in the studio is creative staff. They're all passionate about what they do and want to do things a certain way. It's my job to curate everybody's ideas. I'm sure that there are people who feel the same way about me as that I felt about Chris. So, yeah, it's challenging. But luckily, I know how it feels to be on the other side.
So I don't know if I had a chance to mention to you personally, but I really like what you're doing with the black plate. And it's looking really great.
FFG, about 3 years ago, was acquired by the Asmodee Group. We won't get into why. I think there's a lot of excellent reasons why. Fantasy Flight by itself was always a business and a studio. We did not have just a studio where we made games. We also had our warehousing, our accounting, our licensing, and so being in charge of both was never really that big of a change.
As painful as it might have been for him to kind of walk away, I think that he knew that it was in good hands.
I am still involved in the sense that I'm the head of publishing of all these studios, so I discuss and have big ideas with lots of crazy, concepts.
I'm sure that if he wasn't running the company, he would love to be sitting at a desk, like mocking up cards.
I try to stay away when I can, or I try to bite my tongue, because everybody has opinions.
As passionate as he is about games, he has handed that off to other people.
There's always elements that you miss when you walk away from, or there are things that you think you want to do that you haven't achieved yet. And then when you get there, you say, oh, maybe this is not as exciting as I thought. I want to go back.
I get the sense that he has accepted that.
I get to have a lot of fun discussions and manage a lot of great people. So I'm not by no means unhappy or sad. Don't get me wrong.
Welcome to the 2017 In-Flight Report for Fantasy Flight Games. This may be news to some of you. You might be expecting to see Christian Peterson up here.
Hey, we're here at Gen Con, and 20 years ago, we first released Twilight Imperium First Edition. We've streamlined it, we've made the game just meatier and more interesting and more exciting, and I'm just saying buzzwords that mean absolutely nothing, so I'm going to start over.
When's it going to be coming out?
I don't know.
The last thing I wanted to talk about was, I'm sure it's the thing that everyone's, wondering is, where's my sexy turtle?
Well, this is one of the coolest pieces, I think, because it took the extra very diplomatic, and just made them total badasses.
I don't remember exactly the circumstances, but I'm pretty sure I promised a sexy turtle.
That's about as sexy as a turtle's gonna get, I think.
I was particularly surprised by that piece because I never thought the extra could look that cool, because they're just turtle people.
Where's my sexy turtle, bro? I did some research. It turns out male and female turtles are pretty much the same. But I did kind of have an idea in the sketch phase to create some kind of turtle who had sort of a milking machine thing attached to him. I guess at this point I feel weird because I was promising a sexy turtle, and I I don't know. I guess I find that. Who's to say what a male turtle spaceman is going to find sexy? So I'm building worlds here.
At the end of the process like this, it's always kind of a relief.
We're always going to be making Twilight Imperium.
So I've had that question asked me a lot. So are you handing off your baby, whether it's the company, whether it's Twilight Imperium or whatever? And I think it's not a baby anymore. It's a fairly smelly teenager living in the basement that probably needs to go out and get a good education. And certainly, as you know, as a parent, the best teachers are not the parents.
Being able to like revisit it, it's like, I don't know, going back and seeing an old friend that you haven't seen in a while, but this old friend we get to put a new coat of paint on.
And that's the end of my documentary about Twilight Imperium. It doesn't really have a satisfactory ending.
That's completely okay, because there's only one way that this can end. It's with the official Shut Up and Sit Down review of Twilight Imperium 4th edition. Coming soon, because they haven't actually sent us a game yet.
No, they haven't. I won't be involved with the review because I've been so close to this project and talking to these people that it doesn't make sense. But he hasn't done anything, so he can do it. It's great. Finally, just a little reminder that Shut Up and Sit Down, we are an independent website, and if you looked at this and thought, wow, this must be somehow paid for by Fantasy Flight, then that's really heartwarming and endearing that you think that, but it has honestly just been me doing it for months, and we've just done it because it's fun and cool.
We thought that this is the kind of thing we'd like to try doing. We thought it would be a story we'd want to try telling.
Yeah, probably won't do it again. It takes ages.
It turns out making a documentary when there's like 2 of you.
Literally months and months and months. Thank you so much for watching, and if you've enjoyed this, do go and check out Shut Up and Sit Down, if only for our TI4 review, which will happen at some point soonish.
It's going to be kind of like a cardboard gateway drug, though. You're going to watch the TI4 review, you're going to go, do these guys have other opinions?
We've got more than 4.
We have opinions.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you again.
Good work.
Thanks. Bye.
Was it hard?
It was a nightmare.